There is a word that we hear at times, contentment, content. What does it mean to be content? And actually, more so, what does it mean to be content in the midst of a tragedy or in the midst of an unthinkable? The truth is that this week we have experienced in our nation another school shooting with an elementary school. And so our topic today is contentment. Yet we are going to focus specifically on contentment in the midst of the unthinkable, in the midst of tragedy. Because we have this example right now in a broad term of a tragedy of multiple children killed, a couple of teachers, a community rocked. And we go, what does it mean to be content in the midst of something like this? Yet our stories have many more examples as well of those unthinkable things that happen in our lives. And in Philippians 4, Paul talks about being content in all circumstances. And this is how it appears in Philippians 4:11 through 13. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I've learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through Him who gives me strength. So let's define contentment, being content. Let's define that to begin with. If you look at the Greek words and the Hebrew words, it means to be free from care, to be pleased, to be self-sufficient. And when I think of that, because how are we free from care when we're in the midst of a tragedy? It appears more about I'm okay. I'm not okay with what's going on, yet I'm grounded in something more than my circumstances. So let's talk about a couple of things based on about contentment. First of all, contentment requires accepting our powerlessness. And this is, I think, one of the most difficult pieces of being content in the midst of the unthinkable is that we have to identify that we are powerless. There is so much in our lives, in our country, in our world that is beyond our control. And oftentimes we focus on what we can't control rather than on what we can control. And so at the core is this admission. And what is interesting about admitting that we are powerless is it feels like we're saying what we're powerless over is okay. And we're not saying that. It's we're acknowledging that we're not the all-powerful one, that we are powerless. And that is critical to contentment, because as long as I'm trying to force my way in a situation to control, then I don't feel okay. I don't feel okay within myself, because things can be not okay outside of me and I can still be okay. I can still function. I can still walk through life in a way that is effective. So the first thing is contentment requires that we accept that we are powerless, that we are powerless over things. So acceptance is key to contentment. Second thing is contentment does not mean inaction, yet is often opposite of our reaction. If we think about in tragedies, in the unthinkables, if you're anything like me, I go to these possible things that I can do, and I have to pause. I need to pause in those moments, and I need to prayerfully consider what are the most effective next steps. Contentment does not mean that I don't take action. It is more about what that action is rooted in, and what is the most effective steps. If we get in an argument with a family member or a friend, we may think, well, I need to call them. I need to call this other person and tell them what happened. I need to do all these things. Deep breath in the midst of it, and we pause and we seek God's guidance about what are the most effective steps. It's like when a tragedy happens, maybe we're like, well, I'm posting on social media and let everybody know what I think about this. And that may be the most effective thing, but it's this moments of pause, of taking a deep breath to determine what the most effective steps are. So contentment doesn't mean inaction. It means intentional and prayerful next steps that we take. The third thing is our contentment is not based on circumstances. Think about it. Think about think about a tragedy that has happened to you, the unthinkable, and think about how that we can't live life based on our circumstances. Because oftentimes we'll think, well, once this happens, I'll be okay. Once this stops happening, I'll be okay. Contentment means being okay in the midst of any and all circumstances. Paul says, I've learned the secret of being content in every situation. You're like, Paul, tell us, what's the secret? What's the secret to being content? That our insides are not based on what we're experiencing, isn't totally based on what's going on outside of us. Consider how each of us responds differently to the same circumstance. It's because we're responding not based on external things, but internal things. So our contentment is not based on circumstances. And remembering that Paul says that he's learned, that is a process. It's not an event that we continue as we walk through circumstances in life to experiencing things differently. But he tells us that he's got the secret. And what the secret is he says, I can do all this. I can be okay in all circumstances through him that gives me strength. You see, because contentment comes from a power greater than ourselves and not our circumstances. It's not about us. It's not about outside of us. It's about the one who is bigger than. We get our strength. Think about those things that we've been through, and we look back and we go, how did I get through that? Like, I don't have any idea how I got through that. It's because of a power greater than ourselves. It's through the strength that we're incapable of creating ourselves, but that through God, we are strengthened. Tragedy, unthinkable circumstances, it's hard to even wrap our heads around how are we content in that? And that doesn't mean that we don't feel feelings, that we're not sad and frustrated and disappointed and angry. That doesn't mean that's not part of our response to tragedy and the unthinkables. It's that we seek this contentment from something far greater than exists with people and circumstances. That we are okay in any and all situations. That our strength comes from a power greater than ourselves. So what do? We accept our powerlessness. We prayerfully consider which actions to take next. And we remember that all of that is rooted in the one who gives us strength in the midst of tragedy and of the unthinkable. That is how we seek to live a life of contentment.